All right, Frank Klose does the mailbag. He answers your questions at 973ESPN.com and answers them live right here on the air. If you have a Phillies question for Frank, send us a text, 609-403-0973. Our first text message came in and says, how about that blockbuster trade? Jason Vargas, why couldn't they be aggressive after Stroman? You know, that's an interesting question. Did the Phillies have something in their system that's comparable that if they would have – we talked about this the other day, like Klintak, last time you and I did the show together, like Klintak, has he made calls to say – and I told you, I just don't think the Phillies have anything that they could have been aggressive and done things earlier.
I mean, you saw what the Mets gave up, though, for Stroman and thought, couldn't the Phillies have matched that?
I don't know. Frank, do you think the Phillies had something comparable to what the Mets gave up to get Stroman?
I think so, but actually kind of what I'm seeing around all of baseball is that this price was a lot less than a lot of teams anticipated, and the types of teams that have players like Stroman who are signed to one more year after this one, the Mike Miners, the Robbie Rays, well, that's kind of complicating their trade situation because the teams that are talking to them are saying, well, look, this is what a starter's worth. And the teams that have the assets say, well, no, it's not. So every once in a while we see a trade like this that kind of surprises you and you think it's not enough. The Blue Jays, maybe they were just intent on making a trade. Both those guys in the trade were in the futures game this year, so maybe they were guys they wanted in particular and they were ready to make the move. So it's really hard to say if there's an unequal, but I think in general teams were surprised how light the price was.
We had Jared Diamond on earlier, Frank, and he just tweeted this out. The fact that the Diamondbacks, a team that Baseball Prospectus has nearly 16% playoff odds, are obvious sellers, and most of their fans seem happy about it, is further proof that in sports being smart so often comes at the expense of being entertained. So we had talked about with him, is being a wild card team a microcosm of success for the Phillies? Does it even matter to the fans if they get that wild card spot? Because he says around baseball, a lot of organizations don't find that wild card to be attractive enough to go after.
Right. I mean, I think if the Phillies were fighting in that one-game playoff and they had Aaron Nola to pitch for them, they feel pretty good about it, right? But you never know just when you need your ace or your really to lay it all on the line just to get to that point. It might all seem for naught because, if you spend a lot of money, you trade a lot of your prospects and it goes away quickly, that could really you could really feel a burn after that. But I think for an organization like the Phillies as a whole, they really kind of need to at least show they're on the right trajectory. And I think after trading those prospects for JT Realmuto, signing Bryce Harper, signing Andrew McCutchen, and signing David Robertson, who may never pitch for them this season, all those types of moves kind of gave the impression that it's time to win. And if they don't win, I think they've kind of lost a lot of the excitement from the fan base in this situation.
So, Frank, in college, when I was at Penn State and wrote for the Collegian, I wrote a column called Mostradamus, right, where I would predict games on the weekend. And I haven't shared with our audience yet that I had a Mostradamus moment with you a couple of weeks. Oh, it had to be 3 weeks ago, right?
Yeah, it was a few weeks ago, and Jeff sent me a text message, and he said, what about Jason Vargas from the Mets? My reaction was it'd be a little underwhelming, but that can't be the only thing that they would do. And Jeff's right. And this is kind of the thing that he's going to do is kind of be a depth piece. He didn't cost the Phillies much of anything, and if that's all they do, I think Phillies fans will be pretty upset. I think the Phillies should do more than that. But you're in a situation now where Zach Eflin looks like he could go in the injured list, or he could go to the minors.
The heavy
Jake
list.
Arrieta has the both. Yeah, Jake Arrieta has the bone chips in his elbow, and then Nick Pavetta's already been demoted to the bullpen, and wouldn't you know, your second most reliable starter right now is Vince Velasquez, who you kicked out of the rotation a few weeks ago. So
amazing.
It's a tough time for the Phillies rotation. So I think any chance to grab any type of depth whatsoever, you try to do it at this point.
What do you think of the idea of possibly, if you make another deal, pushing Arrieta to the back end of the bullpen?
I don't really see him as that type. I don't see him as the type that would necessarily like that. I think if anything, if you have some extra depth, maybe you try to to give him some rest or try to address that elbow a little bit, so that when it comes September, you can have him with some gas in the tank, because that veteran leadership and presence, I think that's important to have in the rotation, and maybe you can't ride him like you normally would if he were healthy, but I still think Jake Arrieta, he's not to quote Gabe Kapler, but Murray said Jake Arrieta at 85% is better than a lot of other guys, and I think that's still the case.
Do you think, Frank, if you could – I mean, I have a hard time thinking that I know he has an ego, but I also think that some of the guys like Schmaltz, even Brett Myers did it. If he went to the pen to become a closer, to come in the ninth and close out the games, that could maybe satisfy the ego that he has as a starter.
Based on the injury that he has.
To throw 2 pitches that he could, based with his injury situation, that he could be a really good closer for this team and almost kind of be the guy known as the guy who made the sacrifice to push this team over the hump. I can't say I'm starting to grow on the idea of Pivetta for the 7th and 8th and Arrieta for the 9th. I know it's kind of idealistic right now, and it's only been a short-term dosage of Pivetta as a back-end bullpen guy, but it just takes so much stress off the other starters to have to go 6 or 7 innings.
Well, I think a lot will depend, too, on what the Phillies can do at this trade deadline. Now, they were linked to Alex Colomé of the Chicago White Sox recently, who could step in and be a closer or an 8th-inning guy for the Phillies. And it sounds like since Colomé is a high salary, he won't cost a lot in terms of prospects, so he might be somebody they bring in. I think the Phillies will try to add somebody like that first before they try to do something a little bit more radical with Arrieta, and I think the fact that they're doing this with Pivetta now, they've done it with Velasquez briefly, albeit, and they might do it again. All those things I think would happen before they consider doing that with Arrieta, and I think that they really kind of need him in the rotation at the moment, even if they add an arm or two. I mean, it doesn't sound like they're going to really do any earth-shattering moves in terms of big-name pitchers coming into town. So you might actually need Jake Arrieta in that starting rotation, even with those bone chips in his elbow.
All right, Phil asks, how many more moves will we see? Anything significant? Sounds like you don't think so.
Right. So I think this is a really tough trade deadline. There's what I think the Phillies should do and what I think the Phillies will do. And in terms of trying to answer what the Phillies will do, I'm really kind of puzzled at this point. They're very good at keeping things close to the chest. You don't really hear a lot of things leaking out from this front office like you used to in the past. So you kind of don't really know much of what they're doing, and they've been pretty good at surprising people along the way so far. And it sounds like they are trying to add a reliever with that Colomé news. It sounds like they're still kind of kicking around for some starting pitching. Doesn't sound like they're going to go big to the Greinke kind of move, but maybe again if they can eventually satisfy the Rangers for someone like Mike Minor, who they've had their eye on for a long time, maybe that would work. But it really has to depend on how much these other teams win. I mean, if Marcus Stroman's deal did drive down the prices, maybe they'll fight, but they sound really reluctant to trade their prospects. So, what I think the Phillies should do, I would still try to add not 1 but 2 starting pitchers even after Vargas, and maybe some sort of right-handed bat to play left field for now, who could take the right-handed at bats from the position, even with Jay Bruce coming back eventually. But some people have said Yasiel Puig. There's a segment of Twitter that's kind of talking about that right now. From the Reds, thinking that maybe they could get Puig and Roark from them. But there's a lot of teams in on Roark right now, so that complicates the matters a little bit. But what they will do, it's just really hard to say right now. They're just so tight-lipped. Usually somebody in the past would leak out some sort of information along the way as we approach the trade deadline in previous years. Like everybody kind of had a build-up to the trades of yesteryear, the Hunter Pence trades, the Cliff Lee trades, those types of deadline moves. But we're just not seeing that at all happening this year.
Give me Mike Leake and Domingo Santana from the Mariners, and I'm probably not going to have to give up much, and I think I'm a little bit better of a team and deeper. That's funny you mentioned that, having just mentioned Hunter Pence, because Domingo Santana was one of the players traded for Hunter Pence. What was that, 8 years ago now at this point? So that would be an interesting move. Mike Leake he does have a no-trade clause. Sounds like he's really tried to keep
keep himself on the West Coast, but you never know. If certainly Matt Klentak and Jerry Dipoto, who once worked together closely in Anaheim, they're really good at making trades with one another. They've already made 3 or 4 to this point, so that wouldn't totally shock me. But I'm just not sure that Mike Leake wants to leave his comfortable West Coast.
All right, Frank. Also, Chris wants to know, should the Phillies sign JT Realmuto to an extension soon? Good, solid catching is not easy to come by. This is an interesting question, the way it was phrased, because I see so much hate for Realmuto out there. People just think that the guy is not what they thought he would be. Like he was going to come in and be some 35 homer guy or something. I'm like, what are you not getting here? Like the guy does.
He's been bad with runners in scoring position, Mike. There's no doubt.
But I think the problem is he is hitting in a spot in the order that he should not be in right now because of the injuries this team has had. But if he was where he should be, he's been pretty solid. And by the way, he's outstanding behind the plate.
Right. I think one thing that definitely is as advertised, where the defensive metrics are very kind to.
He out like 40% of the runners.
Yeah, it shows what kind of effect he's actually had behind the plate. And we know that previously we saw Alfaro struggle a little bit with certain aspects of the catching game, and I think fans might just have had really high expectations because of the number of prospects traded for him. I think fans saw a lot of the good things that Alfaro has to offer, and probably will continue to offer in the National League East. And Sixto Sanchez was a name that was kind of a household name for a prospect, which is kind of rare. And certainly him being in the futures game recently was a big deal, just in terms of showing off what he can do. So the expectations might have been a little high, but I do believe that the Phillies are very much interested in extending Realmuto. There might be a conversation that happens at the end of the year in the off season. Matt Klentak said when they traded for him that maybe you want to date a while first before you get married. Using that metaphor to describe whether or not they would offer him an extension immediately. But I think that the team, spent that high price in terms of prospects, kind of expecting to try to extend him. And I think that's something that he absolutely will pursue at the end of the year.
By the way, it seems like Ken Rosenthal reporting that the Phillies are going to sign Blake Parker, the right-hander who got released by the Twins recently.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
they have signed him according. I'm sorry, Matt Gelb is the first to report that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I think the Phillies are doing what they did with Mike Morin, and just trying to add as much depth as they possibly can, and we'll see where that goes. That's the type of move I think that they're going to try to do. I have to look at his control. Obviously, this is kind of a breaking.
We're throwing it right at you.
Right at you. But here's a question for you. Here's a question for you that you might be able to get back on your feet on real quick. We kind of threw this around earlier. Is Spencer Howard is up to Double-A. Now, I know he's only had one start. He had 10 strikeouts. He's 23. If he has 4 or 5 solid starts, and they're about a game out and the calendar turns to September, do they look to add him into the rotation? Is he a guy? We have talked about Medina in the past, but could Howard actually, bounce over him and be considered in September if this team is in the race?
I don't think he's at that point yet. He's only had 9 starts.
Man, you poo-poo everything fun, Frank.
Well, I think that he's somebody who might get an invite to spring training next year. I don't think he'd even be on the opening day roster. I think he's the type that maybe next year in season might make a difference. They definitely like him. He was drafted out of college, so he's a little bit more mature in terms of years. So I think there's a chance you could see him soon, but not that soon.
All right, Frank Klose, at Frank Klose. Every week we do the Phillies Mailbag, and as I was telling Frank, we were talking about some ideas for the fall coming up earlier today, and I said, hey, by the way, Phillies traffic on the website is up naturally from last year. I mean, last year the team just didn't have a whole heck of a lot of interest, but the traffic numbers on the Phillies are up. Because people are a little bit more interested. But I don't know, Frank. It seems that people are starting to fade with the Eagles starting right now, where the Phillies kind of how they have played.
No.
And then they how they stacked up against the Braves this weekend. They've got to do something between now and August the 8th when the Tennessee Titans play the Philadelphia Eagles. They've got to do something to get people back energized about this team.
Well, if they're going to do something, it has to happen in the next 20, well, not 24 hours, 24 hours and 14 minutes
14
when the
minutes.
trade deadline hits, because after that, they can't make another move. No
So
more
not Blake Parker, by the way. We mean something more than that.
Yeah, you need a little bit more than Blake Parker, and just checking on Parker. He just signed a minor league deal, so
Right.
he's somebody you can stash at AAA and then grab later if you need to. Because again, you can't make those August trades. So
Right.
whatever the Phillies are going to do, they have to do now. And we see with this move like Parker, they're just trying to have some depth down at AAA so that they have something from which to grab in case there are more injuries. Because you still have a third of the season left. If somebody gets hurt, you can't do anything about it.
He's Frank Klose. Follow him at Frank Klose right here on the Sports Bash Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Thank you, pal.
Thanks, guys.